I sold my ranch for $185 million. My husband asked me to say I was bankrupt, and what my family did in 24 hours opened my eyes forever. The receipt was folded in thirds and sitting at the bottom of my purse, underneath my phone, my keys, and a lip balm I hadn't used in 4 months. 185,000 pesos. $1,000. I knew the number by heart the way you know a scar. Not because you look at it constantly, but because it's always there, just beneath the surface, present in a way that changes how everything else feels. I had been carrying that receipt for 3 weeks when I placed it flat on a restaurant table in front of my entire family, my mother's neighbors, and a room full of people who had spent the last 24 hours deciding I was a failure worth pitying. Lorena's mouth stopped moving mid-sentence. My mother went the color of old chalk, and I understood in that specific, irreversible way that you can only understand something once, that I had not just sold a ranch. I had sold the last thing that kept me attached to a version of my family that had never actually existed. But I'm starting at the end, and this story only works if you understand what the beginning cost. I had been running the ranch alone for 11 years when Mateo came into my life, not managing it, not overseeing it, running it, with my hands, my back, my credit, and the specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on your face because you stopped having the energy to wear it there years ago. The ranch was called La Esperanza, the Hope, which my father named it when he bought the land in 1987, and which felt, by the time I took it over at 24, less like a name and more like a dare. My father had the vision. He lacked the discipline, the sobriety, and, like when the first serious drought hit in 2003, the willingness to stay. He handed me the keys and the debt simultaneously, with the casual ease of a man passing off a problem he'd decided was someone else's now, and moved to the city to live with his brother. My mother had left 2 years before that. Lorena, 8 years younger than me, had just started secondary school in Monterrey and needed, or so my mother explained, a stable environment. I was 24 years old, standing in a field of stressed tomato plants in 40-degree heat, with 340,000 pesos in unpaid equipment loans, and a ranch that needed everything simultaneously. I didn't ask for help. That was the first mistake, I think. Or maybe the last good decision I ever made for myself, depending on how you look at it. I didn't ask because I knew nobody was coming, and knowing that clearly, starkly, without softening, was the thing that made me capable of doing what had to be done. I hired 2 workers, Daniel and Felix, both from the neighboring property, both men who knew drought-resistant farming better than I did and were patient enough to teach me. I restructured the loans through Banco Regional del Norte, working with a loan officer named Patricia Solis, who had 15 years of agricultural financing experience, and who told me, very directly, that I had 6 months before the bank would have to act. I planted agave as a drought hedge. I converted 2 hectares to covered greenhouse growing. I drove the delivery truck myself for 3 years to avoid paying a logistics contractor. In year 4, the ranch turned its first profit. In year 7, I hired my 5th full-time employee. In year 11, La Esperanza was producing 800 tons of mixed vegetables annually across 14 hectares, with a regional distribution contract and a line of credit that had long since been paid off and rebuilt into an asset. And through all of it, my phone lit up like a slot machine every harvest season. The requests started small. That's important to understand. They always start small. My mother called in year 2, the first year I'd made a profit, though a thin one, and asked for 15,000 pesos for roof repairs. I sent it. I was glad to. She was my mother and the roof was real and I was making money and it felt good to help. That's the architecture of it, I understand now. The first few times are real. They have to be, or you'd recognize it too soon. The roof was real, the car repair was probably real. The first 3 medical bills were almost certainly real. It's somewhere in the middle that reality becomes optional and your love becomes a mechanism. By year 5, I was sending money 3 or 4 times a year. By year 8, it was closer to once a month. My mother needed a refrigerator, a new water heater, medications that weren't covered. My father had debts, the nature of which was never specified, and which I stopped asking about because the answers were unsatisfying, and the requests came regardless. Lorena needed tuition, then books, then living expenses in the city. I sent it, every time. I sent it because they were my family, and I had worked very hard, and I could afford to, and it felt, I want to be honest about this part, it felt like proof that I had made something, that the hard years had been worth something beyond my own survival, that I was the kind of person who took care of people. I sent 6,000 to 870,000 pesos in 15 years. I didn't know that number until Mateo put it in a yellow notebook on our kitchen table, not because I couldn't have calculated it myself, the records were there, every transfer documented, but because I had never once added it up, never once looked at the total, never once allowed myself to see what the individual acts looked like assembled into a sum. 687 million pesos. Mateo is a quiet man. He's an agronomist by training, methodical, careful with language in a way that sometimes reads as emotional distance, but is actually the opposite. It's precision. He says the thing he means and nothing more, which means when he speaks, I listen. He put the notebook on the table the night I signed the sale papers, not as an accusation. He didn't say, look what they've taken from you. He just put the number there, open, and let me sit with it. Then he turned pages. The documentation Mateo had assembled was the kind of thing that only a man with infinite patience and a deep, quiet fury could build over years. Bank transfer records, screenshots of messages, a timeline he'd constructed in a spreadsheet that mapped every request against what happened after the money landed. My mother asked for 45,000 pesos for roof repairs in October of year 8. 6 weeks later, she posted vacation photos from the coast. The roof, as far as anyone could tell from subsequent visits, had received no repairs. Lorena asked for 28,000 pesos for university registration fees in March of year 10. The following month, a designer handbag appeared in her social media photos with the tag, "Treated myself." My father's debts, across 4 separate requests totaling nearly 200,000 pesos, had apparently been resolved without any of the urgency that had characterized the original calls. I sat with each page for a long time. Then Mateo showed me the group chat. I had thought I was removed from the family WhatsApp group 2 years prior. There had been a reset of the group, a new name, and when I wasn't added back, I assumed it was an oversight and didn't push it. Family group chats are noisy and I was busy. It wasn't an oversight. Mateo had been added, briefly by mistake, when Lorena reorganized the contact groups, and he'd screenshot what he found before they caught the error and removed him. There were months of messages. I won't reproduce all of them, because some of them I can only read once before I have to put my phone face down and breathe for a while. But there was one exchange that I keep coming back to. A thread from the previous November, 2 weeks before my mother called me about a new leak in the roof. Lorena: "Mom, cry when you ask. Mariana always gives in when you cry." My mother: "Tell her there's another leak. She must have money after harvest." Scripts, not requests. Scripts, with stage directions. Cry when you ask. I sat at the kitchen table in complete stillness for approximately 20 minutes. I know this because the light changed. I was watching the window and the evening light shifted from gold to blue-gray, and I hadn't moved. Mateo didn't say anything. He just sat with me. When I finally spoke, I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because it surprises people. I didn't cry because the feeling wasn't grief exactly. It was more like the sensation of a map being corrected. All those years when I thought I understood the terrain, and the terrain had been something else entirely. "They never asked," I said, finally. Mateo looked at me. "When I broke my wrist," I said, "nobody came. My mother called 5 days later asking about a refrigerator." I paused. "They never asked." He nodded. "Tell them you lost everything," he said quietly. "Say the bank took the ranch. If they love you, I'll apologize personally for every page in this notebook." I wanted him to be wrong so badly it felt like a physical thing, a tightness in my chest, a held breath. I wanted him to be wrong the way you want a doctor to tell you it's nothing, even knowing, even with the screenshots right there. I said, "Okay." I called my mother at 8:47 the next morning. I'd rehearsed it, which felt strange, rehearsing a conversation with my own mother, but I needed the words to be steady, and I knew that hearing her voice would make steadiness harder. "Mom," I said, "I need to tell you something. The ranch, it's gone. The bank took everything. There were debts I couldn't manage, and the last harvest wasn't enough. I have nothing left." The silence on the other end was immediate and total. I had known, somewhere, what a mother's silence sounds like in that situation. The sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean?" That comes from the chest, not the throat. The first question being, where will you go? Where will you sleep? Are you safe? This was not that silence. This was the silence of a woman doing arithmetic. It lasted 11 seconds. I counted. "What do you mean, nothing?" she finally said. "I mean, I have nothing, Mom." Another pause. "But what about what I was going to ask you for next month?" She hung up 40 seconds after that. She did not ask where I would live. She did not ask if I was safe. She did not say she loved me. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a while. Then I called Lorena. Lorena's reaction was faster and less disguised. "What about Camilla's tuition? It's due next month." Camilla was her daughter, my niece, 9 years old. The tuition request had been introduced 6 months prior. "I can't help," I said. "You always play the victim," she said. Her voice had that specific edge she used when she wanted to make me feel unreasonable for having a limit. "Every time something goes wrong in your little farm life, you act like..." She hung up. Within 4 hours, the family group chat, the one I wasn't supposed to know existed, was apparently on fire. Mateo's contact in the group, a cousin who had stayed quiet through everything and who I won't name here out of genuine appreciation, screenshotted the exchange and sent it to him. My mother. She asked for this. 20 years of playing the martyr. Lorena. She only thought she was a businesswoman because she grew vegetables. My father. Online. Reading everything. Saying nothing. His silence had always been its own particular language. I'd spent 20 years translating it as passivity. I now understood it was something more deliberate than that. The careful neutrality of a man who benefited from conflict he was unwilling to either join or stop. Then my mother called back. Her voice was different this time. Measured. Performing something. "Mija," she said, the diminutive she used when she wanted something. "About the anniversary dinner Saturday. I think, given your situation, it might be better if you didn't come. It would be uncomfortable for everyone." She was uninviting me from my parents' anniversary dinner. I said, very calmly, "I'll be there." She paused. "Mariana, I'll see you Saturday, Mom." I hung up before she could. I spent the days between that call and Saturday in a state I can only describe as organized calm, not numbness. I felt everything clearly. But I was done performing emotion for an audience that had been workshopping how to produce it in me. I called Elena Ruiz, my accountant, who had managed La Esperanza's books for the last 8 years. Elena had 30 years of experience in agricultural finance and had been present for the sale negotiations. She was precise, discreet, and had the specific quality of someone who had seen enough to be unsurprisable. I need 3 things, I told her. A complete transfer history from the business account for the last 15 years, a copy of the original sale receipt with full notarization, and a summary of the buyer contact history for the last 18 months. The last one was important, because buried in Mateo's notebook, on a page I hadn't fully processed when I first read it, was something worse than the group chat messages, an email. It had come from a forwarded address Mateo had traced to my brother-in-law Armando, Lorena's husband, a man with connections in regional real estate through his work in municipal planning. The email was from 6 months prior, and it was addressed to a contact at a property acquisition firm. It outlined the basic details of La Esperanza, acreage, water rights, annual yield, and ended with a line that I read 4 times before it fully landed. The current owner is unaware we have an interested buyer. Timing to be determined, but the property will likely be available within 12 months. We can move quickly if the price is right. They had been working a parallel sale, while still asking me for money. While I was still running the ranch, still paying down the last of the equipment line, still sending transfers in response to engineered emergencies, my family had been quietly exploring what they could extract from the sale of my property. My property that I'd built, that I'd bled for. That had nothing to do with any of them legally or financially, except through the accident of being connected to people who shared my last name. I forwarded the email to Elena and to Rodrigo Vasquez, a civil attorney in Monterrey with 22 years in property and contract law, who Elena had recommended when the sale process began. Rodrigo was the kind of attorney who spoke slowly because he was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. Is this actionable? I asked. Potentially, he said. The email alone doesn't constitute fraud, but depending on what contacts were made with the buyer and whether any representations were made on your behalf without authorization, we may be looking at tortious interference or unauthorized agency claims. He paused. Did the sale close at full market value? Yes, I said. The buyer made contact through my broker, independently. The sale price was never compromised. Then the damage is limited, legally, he said, but the intent is documented. Another pause. Keep everything. I kept everything. The restaurant was called El Jardín, an event venue in the center of town, the kind of place used for quinceañeras and anniversary parties and the performance of family happiness. My mother had booked the private back room, and when I arrived at 7:15 p.m. on Saturday, there were 43 people inside. Family, neighbors, friends of my parents from the neighborhood. People who had watched me grow up and who knew me as the eldest daughter, the quiet one, the one who'd gone off to work the land while Lorena built a life in the city. My mother hugged me at the door with both arms and the specific warmth of a woman performing a scene. Her hands were cold. You came, she said. I said I would, I said. Mateo was beside me. He'd dressed carefully. He was holding my hand in the way that isn't demonstrative, just present, steady, a fixed point. I scanned the table. Lorena was at the center, in a cream dress, her hair done. Armando beside her, in a blazer, watching me come in with an expression that was working hard to be neutral. My father sat at the far end with his wine glass, already looking at something that wasn't me. The dinner was fine. The food was good. The room was loud in the festive way that covers a lot of things. During the toasts, my mother stood up with her glass and spoke for 8 minutes. She praised my father's patience and warmth. She mentioned their children. She spoke about Lorena for 3 full minutes. Professional accomplishments, her beautiful family, the pride she represented. She mentioned me in 1 sentence. And Mariana, who has always worked so hard in the fields. Past tense. Elegiac. The kind of sentence you'd put on a small plaque. Then Lorena stood up and announced, to warm applause, that she and Armando had made a down payment on a new house. She said the neighborhood name, the most expensive district in the city, with a deliberateness that I recognized as directed at me specifically. She looked at me when she said the next part. Since you're struggling right now, Mariana, you could rent our old place. We'd give you family pricing. The room made a sound, a soft, collective exhale of sympathy. Poor Mariana, the one who lost her ranch, the one who was struggling, the contrast that made Lorena's announcement land better. I understood then why I'd been invited back. Not because I was family, because I was a prop. I sat with that understanding for approximately 90 seconds. Then Armando reached into his jacket and slid a folded document across the table to me. A loan guarantee form. My parents' house listed as collateral. My signature required as the eldest child for reasons related to the property's original title structure. I looked at it, then at my mother, then at Armando. Last week, I said I was too embarrassing to bring to this dinner. Tonight, I'm family. My voice didn't shake. I want to remember that it didn't shake. What am I, Mom? Your daughter or a signature? Lorena's face hardened immediately. Nobody respected you before the money. I reached into my purse. The receipt was folded in thirds. I unfolded it slowly. I placed it flat on the table. Under the restaurant lighting, the number was very clear. 185,000 pesos, with the notary seal. Elena's certification stamp in the lower right corner, the buyer's name, the date, everything. Lorena's mouth stopped moving. My mother's hand went to her throat. The table had gone quiet, and then the quiet spread outward the way quiet does in a room when something real has entered it. People at adjacent tables turning slightly. The ambient noise of the restaurant suddenly audible. The sound of forks being set down. I sold the ranch 3 weeks ago, I said, for 185 million pesos. The bank took nothing. I have everything. I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Mateo asked me to say I had nothing, to see what you'd do. I looked at my mother. In 24 hours, you didn't ask where I would sleep. You asked about next month's request. Lorena called me a victim. My father said nothing. And you, I looked at Armando, brought a document to the table that required my signature, which is the only reason I was reinvited to this dinner. The room was breathing, but not speaking. I found the group chat, I said, the one I wasn't supposed to know about. I found the stage directions for how to make me cry. I found the email about the buyer you were shopping behind my back while asking me for money. I paused. Everything. Lorena tried to speak. Her mouth opened and something started. You can't. That's not what, but the words couldn't find their shape because the receipt was right there, physical and real, and there was nothing to reframe it into. My mother made a sound. Not words, just a sound. Something between a breath and a question. Mariana, no, I said. I stood up. I folded the receipt, put it back in my purse. I looked at every face at that table. My mother's chalk-white stillness. Lorena's jaw working on nothing. Armando's careful stillness. My father, who was finally looking at me, his wine glass arrested halfway to his mouth, his face wearing an expression I'd never seen on it before. Something that might have been shame if it had anywhere left to grow. I want to say one thing, I said, to everyone at this table and anyone else who can hear me. My voice was level. I'd worked for 20 years in fields during drought and debt and cold and silence, and my voice was absolutely level. For 20 years, I sent money because I thought that was what love looked like. I thought if I kept giving, eventually it would become real. I thought I was the kind of person who takes care of people. I paused. I still am, but not this. Not engineered crying. Not scripts. Not a signature you need and a dinner invitation you revoke the moment I stop being useful. I picked up my bag. Mateo was already standing. You didn't lose a bank today, I said to my mother. I said it quietly, just to her. You lost the only person in this room who was never pretending. There are things that happened after that night that I've thought carefully about whether to include here, and I've decided to include them because they're true and because leaving them out would make this story feel cleaner than it was. My mother called 4 times in the week after the dinner. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages moved through stages. First confusion, then justification, then something that sounded like anger. Then finally, a quieter message that she left at 11:23 p.m. on a Thursday that I've listened to 3 times and still don't fully know how to categorize. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant for things to be this way. She said she missed me. I don't know if it was true. I genuinely don't. I think it's possible to be sorry and to have done everything she did. I think it's possible to miss someone you treated as a resource. Feelings and behavior are not the same thing, and I've stopped requiring them to be consistent. I haven't called back. Not yet. I don't know if I will. Lorena did not call. Armando sent one message asking if there was a possibility of discussing the loan document. I showed it to Rodrigo Vasquez, who drafted a 4-sentence response that I won't reproduce here, but that Rodrigo described, with mild professional satisfaction, as closing that door cleanly. My father sent a single text 2 weeks after the dinner, just 4 words. I'm proud of you. I read it 6 times. I still don't know what it means exactly, or whether he's earned the right to say it. I saved it anyway. 6 months after the dinner at El Jardín, Mateo and I bought a house, not a ranch. A house with a garden, a covered porch, rooms with tall windows and good light. We planted things because we wanted to, not because anything depended on the harvest. Elena Ruiz continues to manage our finances. Rodrigo Vasquez drew up a complete family estate document that is airtight in ways that would make Armando's document request look amateur by comparison. I visited a therapist named Dr. Sofia Guerrero, who specialized in family systems dynamics and had 18 years of clinical experience. I want to mention her by name because she gave me something I didn't know I needed, a framework for understanding how engineered dependency works, how it's constructed over years, how it conditions the target to interpret exploitation as love. You're not unusual, she told me in our second session. You're actually very common. Capable, high-functioning people are more frequently targeted by this pattern, not less. Capability looks like a resource. I wrote that down. Capability looks like a resource. I thought about that for a long time afterward, and I thought about the 24-year-old woman who took over a struggling ranch alone in the middle of a drought and didn't ask anyone for help. Not because she was too proud, but because she had already understood at some level that the help wasn't coming. She'd been right. She'd just been wrong about one thing. She thought the absence of help was accidental. She didn't know it was strategic. She knows now. The yellow notebook is in the drawer of my nightstand. I don't read it often, but sometimes, on the nights when the old instinct comes back, the pull to call, to fix, to send, to smooth things over, to be the good daughter, I open it to the first page. One number, 6,170,000 pesos. Not a wound anymore. A reference point. A reminder of what love that was never pretending is actually worth.